So for me, writing has always come naturally. I've had a diary ever since I've had an opinion. Writing takes you to a place of wondrous curiosities because essentially what you write is who you are. But when you're telling a story, writing it is only half the battle. With no one to listen, a story loses its ability to be heard. We read books because they serve as a distraction from our daily lives. We are invited into a world which is not our own, and in turn, gain perspective from the characters. In 2010, Brandon Stanton introduced the world to a new form of storytelling. He created his own photojournalism blog titled Humans of New York, and which started out as a side hobby, turned into a full-fledged profession. He began his hobby by approaching random people on the streets of New York and asking them personal questions about their lives. But as his blog has gained more and more popularity, he didn't ask these people personal questions about their lives anymore. He began to ask them their stories. And instead of approaching random people on the streets of New York City, Brandon started approaching people who seemed as if their stories have already been heard. Well, the summer before my senior year, I had this curiosity to start my own photojournalism blog titled Dear My Teenage Self. And so the very first person I interviewed was a man named Banjo Man. I would say his name, but I never asked for it. I met him at the Columbus Arts Festival downtown, which is a festival which showcases local music and local art. And immediately I was drawn to this man. There was something about him. And I think it was probably because of his banjo. I've never seen one in real life before, so I knew I had to talk to him. So immediately I went up to him, I introduced myself, I explained my intentions, and I asked him, if you could go back in time, what wisdom would you share with your teenage self? And he looks me in the eyes and he says, don't get married. And I just turned 18 yesterday, and I can't imagine getting married as a teenager, so I wish I would have asked him if there was a backstory to that. But instead, I was so in shock that I just immediately replied, is that it? He looks at me and says, do you have a better answer? So I said, no, of course not. That was perfect. Thank you so much. And immediately after our conversation ended, it started pouring down rain. So Banjo Man invited my friends and I and all of the passerbys around us to take shelter. And he started playing his banjo, and he told us all to start singing. Not a single person in that tent was a singer. It sounded horrible. I wanted to leave, run out, but it was pouring down rain, so I couldn't. But his charisma and his ability to turn that situation completely upside down was incredible. The next person I would like to introduce you to is a 4th grade girl named Allie. So I did not, like Brandon Stanton, I wanted to broaden who my project illuminated. So I started asking elementary school kids advice on how to be a teenager. So before I could just randomly approach these kids in their classrooms, I had to meet with the director of communications at New Albany Schools. And together we created a photo release form, which primarily introduced who I was, my project, and the question that I would ask their child. And it was mainly for the parents. I did not expect these kids to read this 12-font Times New Roman paper. That was really boring. And this girl totally surprised me. She created this novel of a Google Doc beforehand. She edited it with her teacher to make sure there were no grammatical errors, and even found my email somehow and shared it with me. But Allie's advice to her teenage self was that she is incredibly concerned with teenagers today, that we care too much about our outside appearance rather than our inside appearance. And that's why we're always late to every event that we attend. And she also said that when she's a teenager, she will choose friends who inspire her, who will continue to lift her up when she's down, and not because they have cool clothes or whatever else someone deems as cool in the 4th grade. The very next person I would like to introduce you to is a boy named Tiernan. And like Allie, Tiernan is also 10 years old and in the 4th grade. But he goes to a school called the Reese Price Academy, which is an inner-city school in Cincinnati, Ohio. And Tiernan's advice to his future teenage self was almost the same thing that every single kid I've talked before him said. Tiernan's advice to his teenage self was, graduate high school. So I asked Tiernan, I said, hey, the 10 kids before you had the exact same response in one form or another. Isn't this common sense? Shouldn't everyone go to school in order to graduate high school? And he looks at me and he says, no. I want to be the first person in my family to graduate high school. And then he continues to tell me about his mother, who was a high school dropout. And he wanted to show her that graduating high school was possible. Okay, first of all, I love this kid. And his ability to transcend his parents' actions before him is remarkable. And I believe him in that he is completely determined to graduate high school. I have no doubt about that. So you might be wondering, why am I introducing you to these 3 random people? Well, just like with characters in books, you have been able to gain some perspective into their lives. We are all consistently telling stories, whether it's something that happened in the past, whether it's going on right now, or whether it's entirely ambiguous. I challenge you to listen to others, because stories last longer than people do. Thank you.